Hey guys, welcome to A Push with Lennox. Today we're talking about American imperialism, and we're going to look at how the United States becomes a world power as we close out the 19th century and move into the 20th century. Now we're going to look, like I said, at the how and why and see that we are really departing from the personality that we've been living with for the first 100 years of our existence. Remember when Washington told us in his farewell address that we should avoid foreign entanglements? Well, hang on and buckle in because we are completely leaving that idea. So let's go ahead and get started and look at what American imperialism actually is during this time period, okay? All right, to start off with, let's look at, some of the vocab that you should be familiar with during this time period. Now, like I've said time and time again, vocab is essential. You've got to be able to talk the talk. And so these are the terms that you are going to use when you're writing essays or when you're giving reports and stuff like that. If you can't use the lingo, you're not going to show your understanding of everything. So go through this list, see what you know, what you don't know, and when you're ready, move on to the rest of this presentation. Okay, here we go. Big ideas during this time is since the 1790s, our focus has been on expanding the continent, manifest destiny, getting all the way to the western coast. But by 1893, Frederick Jackson Turner declared that the frontier was closed. We basically opened up everything we could. So now what? This is when we get into the 1890s and we start looking beyond our traditional borders. And this is what's going to lead us to become this world power. Now, there's a lot of different motives for imperialism, and I want to talk about each one of them briefly. First, economics. It's always economics. We have become an industrialized nation, and we're producing large amounts of goods. We need new markets to take these goods to. So that's one motivation right there. We're also looking for more raw materials and that we could bring back here and manufacture. So from the economic standpoint, it's all about business. Politically, we're in a competition, a global competition. See, we are the only ones looking to expand beyond our borders, and a lot of other countries have a head start on us. So that's going to cause concern with American businessmen and others saying there's not going to be anything left for us. So we need to get out into the world. Strategically, it made sense. If we're, seeking out these new markets and our merchant fleets are going to be going to these new markets, they need to be protected on the high seas. And that's where our U.S. Navy comes in. Militarily, imperialism will give us the opportunity to plant naval bases throughout the world. And in doing that, we'll be very easily be able to protect our merchant fleet. Alfred T. Mahan wrote the book, The Influence of Sea Power. And this is going to be a driving force behind our military expansion. Mahan concluded that strong countries are developed with strong navies. You can't have one without the other. And we're going to see that the United States is actually going to take that to task, and we're actually going to implement that in our foreign policy. Ideologically, there's this idea of white man's burden that was starting to grow, and it came from Darwin's concept of only the strongest survived. And we're going to apply it to international affairs and relationships. And what we're going to say is we have to go out and colonize. We have to go out into the world to spread our superior civilization to the world, because that's just the right thing to do. So those are our motivations. Now let's get into some of the actual actions of imperialism. And the first place we need to go is Hawaii. 1820s, missionaries actually were the first Americans to go to Hawaii, and they were followed by American planters. Hawaii is a fantastic agricultural center. And so we're going to see Americans go in and start creating sugar and pineapple plantations. One of the most famous families to go in there is the Dole family, Dole fruits. But what's going to happen is they're going to start pushing for America to annex Hawaii. The only problem is Hawaii has its own government. They have their own identity. They're not just floating out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean saying, someone please help us. But we did see some value in Hawaii, specifically Pearl Harbor. That would make a fantastic naval base. And so in 1887, we actually were able to establish a naval base there, but that wasn't enough for the local Americans who lived there. And what they're going to end up doing is in 1893, they're going to lead a revolt against the Hawaiian government, which was led by Queen Liliuokalani. And when they overthrow the queen, they're going to put in their own government. And once they have their own government in place, they are going to argue, or not argue, but present to the United States, hey, we would like to be annexed. We are technically an American, not technically, but philosophically, we're an American territory right now because you have Americans governing this island. So just like you brought in Texas and other states, why don't you go ahead and bring in Hawaii? And you are going to see in 1898, that's exactly what's going to happen under President McKinley, who was a huge supporter of expansion for America. The next area I want to talk about is Cuba. Now, Cuba is only 90 miles away from the United States coastline. And we had talked about annexing Cuba before, right before the Civil War. Remember, we had that whole Ostend Manifesto discussion. Well, Cuba is still under Spanish control at this point. We're in the 1890s. And you have the Cuban people there who are actually starting to revolt and fight for their own independence. And you know Americans love a good fight for independence. Well, what's going to happen is the Spanish government's going to have none of that. They're going to send General Weyler in to take over and control the island. And he's going to institute what's known as a reconcentration policy. And what's going to be the outcome of this? You're going to see a lot of Cubans mistreated, whether it's through starvation or being exposed to disease. And we're going to see a lot of Cubans starting to die. And the American people start calling for our government to get involved. And the question has to be why? Why would we want our government, or why would we want to go down and help? And here's the main reason. We had assets down there. Just like American planters had moved into Hawaii, we have American planters in Cuba. And we beseech our government to go down and give them protection. Now, our government's actually going to do that. We're going to send a warship into Havana Harbor. And in Havana Harbor, we're going to send the battleship Maine, not to do anything, but just to be a presence, to remind the Cuban Spanish government that America has investments in Cuba. Well, what's going to happen is the Maine is actually going to explode and sink, and sailors will be killed. And the reporting on this is going to hit full scale, out of control. And we call this yellow journalism. Yellow journalism was already in place in America, led by people like Pulitzer and Randolph and William Randolph Hearst. And what yellow journalism is exaggerated reporting. You know, for instance, if your sink overflows and you have a little flood in your kitchen, yellow journalism will say that a family got washed out of their home by leaky pipes and that kind of stuff. Well, that's what happened here with the treatment of Cubans under the reconcentration policy, as well as the explosion of the battleship Maine. And so when that happens, a lot of Americans are going to start calling for retribution, especially for the Maine, and they want our government to get involved. That's going to be what leads to the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War is going to start in April of 1898, and it's basically going to be the United States against Spain. However, there will be people from the Philippines, which was a Spanish territory, and Cuba that fight alongside America. Now, when this happens, America wants to make it very clear we don't want Cuba. So we're going to pass the Teller Amendment. And the Teller Amendment says that we have no intention of taking over Cuba. And once this is all over, Cuba will be able to control their own government. Sounds good, right? Hang in there. John Hay, the Secretary of State, is going to refer to the Spanish-American War as that splendid little war. It really wasn't much of a war for Americans. It lasted only 4 months. Now, over 4,000 Americans will lose their lives, but the vast majority was due to disease, not, military casualties or anything like that. We fought both in Cuba and in the Philippines, but both were really not much of a challenge. In the Philippines, George Dewey is actually going to crush the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay. And in Cuba, this is when we're going to see the rise of our hero, Teddy Roosevelt. He and his Rough Riders are going to ride up San Juan Hill behind some other soldiers, and they're going to take the hill. And this will be his claim to fame, his military glory. The war is going to come to an end in August of 1898. So do the math, April, August, about 4 months. And we're going to sign another Treaty of Paris. But this Treaty of Paris is going to spark a lot of debate in the United States. So let's look at that. Through the Treaty of Paris, we are going to get new territories. We're going to get Cuba. We're going to get Guam, we're going to get Puerto Rico, and we're going to get the Philippines. And the question is, what do we do with these territories? Remember, we said we didn't want Cuba, but seems like we have it now. And you're going to have this debate in Congress because remember, a treaty negotiated by a president has to be approved by Congress. In fact, they need 2/3 majority to approve it. And you're going to have two factions in Congress. You're going to have the Anti-Imperialist League and the Imperialists. And the Anti-Imperialist League, they just absolutely opposed annexing any of these territories, specifically the Philippines. They had some big name members in their group, people like Samuel Gompers, the leader of the AFL, Andrew Carnegie, Mark Twain was in there as well. But remember, I mentioned earlier, President McKinley supported expansion. And under his tutelage, Congress will narrowly approve the treaty, but it's get approved. And now we have these new territories. And we got to look at a couple of these, what happened to these territories, because some of this stuff is still, the problems it was called still exist today in our relationships with these countries. Cuba. All right. So let's look at what happened after we ratified the Treaty of Paris of 1898. Well, first of all, remember that Teller Amendment, what happened to that? Well, we're going to replace that with the Platt Amendment. The Platt Amendment is going to be passed in 1901, and it's basically going to give Cuba some limited self-government. See, the Cubans, the Philippines, they all thought when they fought with America that we would support self-government once we won. We weren't quite ready to do that. So in Cuba, we kind of go in as big brother. Let us look over your shoulder and see what's going on. So if you want to negotiate a treaty, let us look over it to make sure that it's a valid treaty and it doesn't limit any independence. If you have any people rising up or any, rebellions or anything like that in your country, the U.S. has the opportunity, or the U.S. has the right to intervene and restore order and peace. That's our job as your big brother. And finally, we get to set up our own naval base in Guantanamo Bay. Still there today. So Cuba, while expecting their absolute freedom, got a limited amount of freedom. Big brother on their shoulder. Puerto Rico, let's talk about that. They get a little bit, not quite self-rule like Cuba did, but they do get some limited degree of government. Under the Foraker Act 1900, Puerto Rico is granted limited popular government. We're withholding self-rule. We're not ready to give them that. We will give the citizens of Puerto Rico their citizenship in 1917, but there's a hitch with that. The status of people living in our American territories, i.e. Puerto Rico, Philippines, other places, there's a question. Just because they're an American territory, just because a location has the American flag flying over it, does that mean the people living there get full constitutional rights and protections? And in the insular cases, these are Supreme Court cases, they answered that question and they basically said, no. The Constitution does not follow the flag. And just because you're an American territory doesn't guarantee you constitutional rights. And you can kind of see that a little bit with Puerto Rico. Yes, they're given citizenship, but then there's questions of voting and stuff like that. So again, it's limited popular government. So we got Cuba, we got Puerto Rico. Now let's talk about the Philippines because it's kind of ugly down here. Whereas we gave Cuba some self-control, we gave Puerto Rico some limited control, big brother again and everything. The Philippines, we gave no control. We're like, you guys aren't ready for any style of self-rule. You need us to help you do that. Well, the Philippines, the people there are kind of upset, specifically Emilio Aguinaldo. Now, he had fought alongside American troops in the Spanish-American War, thinking that the Philippines would gain their independence after this war. Well, when that didn't happen, he's going to lead a revolt against the United States in the Philippines. And it's going to get brutal. It's going to get ugly. And guerrilla warfare is used. And quite honestly, the United States resorts to some of those Weiler-style reconcentration policies in the Philippines that we were supposedly fighting against in Cuba. Eventually, what's going to happen is we are going to be able to negotiate a peace with Aguinaldo, and he will give up. And we're actually going to appoint, McKinley's going to appoint Taft, William Howard Taft, to go into the Philippines as a territorial governor and start trying to secure things and start trying to prepare the Filipinos for self-rule somewhere down the line. Taft is going to go in and he's actually going to do some good things. He's going to set up some or some local governments, but he's going to bring in people from the local area to, bring in those Philippine cultures into their government style. He's going to build some infrastructure, roads, bridges, schools, stuff like that. Eventually, the Philippines do gain their independence. We will give that to them in 1946. Now, all of this, these are the territories we got following the Spanish-American War. But the ultimate goal was to expand our markets. And the first place we're looking at this point is China. We want to explore or go into and take advantage of all these markets in China. Here's the problem. Other countries are already there, and other countries have divided up China into their own little spheres of influence, meaning they have exclusive trading privileges within those spheres. So how do we break through? How do we get U.S. goods in there? Well, John Hay, again, Secretary of State, is going to introduce the open door policy in 1899, which says, hey, there's enough for everybody. Let's just open the door to China, and whoever wants to go in can. Well, what's interesting about this is the other countries didn't agree to this, but they didn't disagree either. And John Hay kind of took it as, well, they didn't say yes, but they didn't say no. So let's go ahead and start moving American goods into China. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, depends on what side you're on, there are a group of people in China who don't like all this European and now American influence coming into China, and they are going to start their own rebellion. It's called the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxers are also known as the Secret Society of the Righteous Harmonious Fists, but Boxer is just easier to say. They're going to rebel against the European powers, and what's going to happen is we're going to be able to put that rebellion down with an international force. We're going to fight alongside England and Germany and France and other countries that have those spheres of influence. Once we do that, once we establish the peace, China is all willing to use that open door policy because, America just helped us. All right. So that's how we got into China. Let's talk about the president, though, and how he's handling all this. Now, I talked a lot about McKinley. Unfortunately, McKinley will be assassinated. When that happens, Teddy Roosevelt, the sitting vice president, will take over as president. And he believed that the power of the presidency should be extended. He should have more power. Now, he's going to continue with McKinley's expansionist ideas, and he's going to actually make it his foreign policy. It's known as big stick diplomacy, and it comes from the old African proverb, speak softly and carry a big stick. The first place TR is going to look is down in Panama. Wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to take our ships all the way around South America to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific? That was a lesson we kind of learned during the Spanish-American War. And how about we build a canal cutting through that little isthmus as we go across, Latin America? It had been thought of before. The French were the first to attempt it, but they failed. So Roosevelt went to Colombia, who had control of the land that we wanted to cut our canal through, and said, hey, we want to lease this land from you. We'll build the canal, and you guys can use it too, and we'll pay you a lease every year. And Colombia said, no. No, they said no. They didn't want anything to do with it. Well, wouldn't it be interesting, however, if that was the case, there happened to be a revolution in Colombia? And it happened. The Panamanians, who were under the control of Colombia, are going to start fighting for their independence. Now, they had the support of TR, not physically, but emotionally, and our heart is with you, Panama. And we also sent some warships down to dock off of, Colombia, just, to see if we could watch the war or something like that. Bottom line, Panama is going to win their independence. And when that happens, we're going to sign the Hay-Bunalvaria Treaty. And that's going to give access to America to land where they will build this canal. And it will also give them a lease that should go into perpetuity. However, in the 1970s, under the Carter administration, he is going to sign a peace treaty to return the canal to the Panamanians. And that happened on December 31st, 1999, under the Clinton administration. The Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is very important for you to understand. Like I said, TR had this idea of expansionism, but he also believed in what was called big stick diplomacy, using power to get things done. Maybe not necessarily using powerful, actions, but showing a powerful force. And so he's going to sign off of what's known as the Roosevelt Corollary. Now, here's what's going on. Following the Spanish-American War, you have countries like England and Germany interacting with Latin American countries. And bottom line, these Latin American countries owed them money. Now, we had the Monroe Doctrine that said that you guys need, the European countries needed to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. But when there's money involved, they're going to come and try to collect. And this worried the United States. So the Roosevelt Corollary basically told European countries, we have the right to intervene in Latin America. And that's actually what we're going to do. And with the case of the money at this point that was owed to England and Germany, the United States basically paid off that loan and assumed it. So now the Latin American countries have to pay us. And we told the foreign countries under no uncertain terms, if you have a problem with any country in the Western Hemisphere, specifically Latin America, you come to us first. We'll take care of it for you. We are, quote, the policemen of this region. This is going to absolutely expand our role in Latin America. It's make it huge. We're going to see more businesses moving into the area. We're also going to see over time, some of our presidents actually send troops down to Latin America and other places to support our agenda in those areas. It's also going to, strain our relationship a little bit between us and some of those countries. Not everyone's loving us down there. When we talk about TR going over to Asia, we already talked about China, but let's talk about Japan. Japan was this growing international force. Like the United States, they're becoming a world power. And we see that in the Russo-Japanese War. Japan was absolutely beating down on Russia. And so the United States, concerned with the role of Japan in the world and its growing power, TR is actually going to help negotiate a peace between Russia and Japan. It's called the Treaty of Portsmouth, and it's actually going to earn TR a Nobel Peace Prize. Yay! At the same time, he's going to negotiate or start the negotiations for what's known as the Gentleman's Agreement. We did have Japanese immigrants coming over to our country at this point from Asia. Now, we didn't have Chinese immigrants because remember, we have the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. But we do have Japanese immigrants coming over, and they're going into California. And what's happening to them as they get here is they're falling victim to some rules and laws being passed in California, specifically San Francisco, where they have segregated schools. And the yellow journalism and everything was passing this idea of yellow peril, well, we have to be afraid of this and everything. So what Japan is upset about is the fact that Japanese immigrants coming over here are being mistreated. So they make an agreement with TR. We will stop immigrants from coming from Japan. We won't even let them get on the boat over here if you will treat the ones that are already in America fairly. And that's what the Gentleman's Agreement is. TR agrees to put pressure on California to repeal those laws that discriminated against the Japanese Americans. At the same time, to show that sense of power, remember, we were worried about the power of Japan, but we want to make sure the world knows that we're a strong entity. We're going to send out the Great White Fleet. It's a fleet of U.S. battleships that literally TR painted white. These battleships were obsolete. It wasn't like we built this whole new fleet. We took the old fleet and just cleaned it up, and we paraded it around the world and said, look at the strength of the American Navy. No one, as far as I know, questioned it. But once again, that sign of force, and that all falls under big stick diplomacy. Show them you got power, and they won't give you a hard time. As we move further into the progressive era, you're going to see these four presidents, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, all are going to start playing a more active role in world affairs and also putting America more into the world. So Washington's, advice, stay out of world affairs, stay out of world entanglements, just ball that up and throw it away because we are now a world power, and we're ready to party in the world. All right. So there you go. That's it. That's American imperialism. I hope you guys learned something today. A little historical knowledge is never a bad thing. We can't wait to catch you on the next one. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.